Everything you were taught about how the world worked, the way nations rise, markets move, and wars begin, was only half the story. What if the real game of history isn't written in school books, but in boardrooms, closed-door meetings, and unsigned agreements whispered between the powerful? The stories we inherit are comforting. Civilizations, progress, democracies, triumph. Free markets reward merit. Peace is the natural order. Yet behind every comforting story is another one, uncomfortable, invisible, and inconvenient. That's the story we are about to trace. History, as it's usually told, is a theater. The curtains rise. The actors play their parts, and we applaud or despair according to the script. But somewhere behind the curtain stand the stage managers, the financiers, the strategists, the planners whose interests shape what happens on stage. Wars don't merely erupt from ideology. They have balance sheets. Revolutions don't ignite out of pure moral awakening. They have funding channels, weapons, suppliers, and silent backers who measure risk and reward like any investment. When we follow the money, the narratives of good and evil blur. What emerges instead is a map of power, influence, and survival. The mainstream version of history prefers heroes and villains. It simplifies chaos into parable, complexity into digestible lessons. But those simplifications serve a purpose. They protect legitimacy. Empires ancient or modern do not survive on truth alone. They survive on belief. Belief that the system is fair, that leadership acts for the common good, that progress is inevitable. To preserve that belief, certain facts must be buried beneath layers of distraction. Not deleted, merely displaced, hidden in plain sight. Even now, economic data, classified reports, and policy papers contain the traces of decisions that have altered lives by the millions. Yet their significance escapes public attention because their language is designed for distance. Money is often seen as neutral, a universal tool of exchange. But money is narrative in its purest form. Currency. Banknote is a promise from authority that the game continues, that the system still holds. And when the promise begins to fray, crises, APR, recessions, hyperinflations, debt collapses, all presented as natural disasters or unintended mismanagement. But beneath the headlines, crises are often tools. They redistribute power. They burn the old structures so new hierarchies can emerge. In every depression, wealth doesn't disappear, it merely changes hands. Consider the 20th century. 2 world wars, presented as moral crusades, also coincided with massive transfers of industrial power, colonial restructuring, and debt realignments that set the foundation of the global order we live in today. The Cold War extended the pattern: military tension as economic strategy, fear as a growth industry. The victory of one ideology over another was never just political. It was financial. Every major conflict leaves behind new markets, new debts, and new dependencies. The map of global influence, ISNT, redrawn by Tacitus. Redrawn by contracts signed after the smoke clears. When history is written, it remembers the explosions, the speeches, the flags waving in the ruins. What it forgets are the negotiations, the corporations that profited from rebuilding what was destroyed, the consultancies that shaped the peace. The victors write the textbooks, but the bankers write the future. Even now, trade agreements drafted in obscurity dictate what farmers can grow, what medicines reach hospitals, what information crosses a digital border. Nations appear sovereign. In reality, they're bound by financial architecture more durable than any constitution. Yet no conspiracy controls everything. The truth is stranger and more human. It has not a single puppet master pulling strings. It has a network of incentives so strong they guide entire generations without explicit orders. Power concentrates because it wants to. It follows opportunity, insulates itself, ensures continuity. Systems evolve like organisms. They develop immune responses to threats: whistleblowers, reformers, independent thinkers. History punishes dissidents, not merely out of cruelty, but necessity. A stable narrative must defend itself. Those who threaten it are exiled to its margins, called radicals, conspiracy theorists, heretics yet. Much of tomorrow's accepted truth begins in those margins today. The hidden patterns of power are not all malicious. They're sometimes simply indifferent. A policy designed to stabilize a currency may also destabilize a region. A corporation seeking efficiency might inadvertently shape an election. Intent is complicated. Outcome is everything. And meanwhile, the public story marches on: heroes, villains, progress, decline. We scroll, we watch, we vote, believing we witness the full scope of cause and effect, but we're usually seeing only the surface ripples above deeper currents. Technology has amplified those currents. Algorithms now shape information flow, deciding not only what we see, but what we never see. Attention has become the new currency. Power today doesn't always declare itself through armies or flags, but through data ownership and narrative control. The ones who write the algorithms write the future memory of events. They sculpt perception, quietly, methodically, until it becomes common sense. And common sense, once formed, is almost impossible to appreciate. Follow history's greatest figures backward, and you will find the financiers, the advisors, the networks that sustained them. Follow the greatest collapses, and you will find those who shorted the fall and rose from it stronger. Power, in its purest form, is not who commands it, who endures. Those who understand cycles, who anticipate crises not as catastrophe but as transition, find advantage where others find ruin. Every empire has followed that rhythm: expansion, saturation, decline, reformation. The names change, the symbols change, but the incentives remain eerily constant. If this sounds cynical, it's not meant to be. It's clarifying. Seeing the machinery behind the stories does not kill meaning, it restores it. We are not powerless before these systems, but we are often blind to them, and blindness is their greatest protection. Once seen, even partially, the illusion loses hold. What was invisible becomes obvious. The historian who questions the record, the economist who traces the footnotes, the citizen who asks who benefits these are acts of quiet defiance. In an age of noise, attention itself becomes rebellion. Some will call this paranoia, but paranoia is merely perception without permission. History's most uncomfortable realities were once dismissed the same way until archives declassified. Memos leaked, and patterns connected revealed what was long suspected. The goal isn't to believe every hidden story. It's to understand why certain stories must remain hidden in the first place. Whenever truth threatens power, it is wrapped in ridicule, secrecy, or bureaucracy. The cloaking mechanism changes, but the intent remains. Try, for a moment, to zoom out, far beyond the headlines, beyond election cycles, or quarterly earnings. What you see is a system of systems: political, financial, media, technological, all overlapping like layers of code in an ancient, ever-updating program. And somewhere at its core lies a single, recurring motivation: control of uncertainty. Every empire, every corporation, every institution seeks to reduce unpredictability in its favor. That pursuit explains more of history than ideology ever could. The slogans change. The structure endures. We're taught to view history as progress, a straight line from primitive to modern, ignorance to enlightenment. But what if progress is circular? What if every generation rediscovers the same ambitions, the same deceptions, with more sophisticated tools? Perhaps civilization isn't a triumph over darkness, but a constant negotiation with it. The line between order and manipulation, freedom and obedience, prosperity and exploitation, that's where the truth of power hides. The philosopher once said that reality is what remains when you stop believing in it. In that sense, so much of what we call reality is authored, written, edited, approved, distributed. When we question those authors, we begin to glimpse something unsettling. History is not only about what happened at S, about what has been permitted to be remembered. Economics is not only about money, it's about permission to see how money moves. Across ages, the names of the powerful fade, but their patterns repeat. Trade becomes empire. Empire becomes nation. Nation becomes corporation. Corporation becomes algorithm, and still the same logic hums underneath. Concentrate influence. limit uncertainty, perpetuate control. It's not evil in the cartoonish sense, simply what complex systems do to survive. But survival at scale comes at a cost. Truth, fairness, transparency, they are traded away quietly, almost gracefully, for stability. Every generation must decide whether to open its eyes to that trade. Some choose comfort, others curiosity. But curiosity has always been the beginning of real freedom, the willingness to look at the machinery and not turn away. Because only by naming the hidden patterns can we ever hope to change them. And so we arrive at the paradox of our age. Never before has information been so abundant, and yet understanding so scarce. We can observe the world in exquisite detail and still miss the forces guiding it. Maybe that's by design. Maybe that's the point, because as long as truth remains fragmented, the architecture of power remains untouched. But here, in the quiet moments of questioning, something else begins. The realization that history's hidden code is not unbreakable. Every narrative, no matter how entrenched, began as a choice to tell the story one way instead of another. And choices can be remade. Systems, however ancient, depend on our participation. They require our consent disguised as inevitability. Once we see that, the world tilts slightly. Familiar events feel different under this lens. Financial crises, political shifts, technological revolutions, they are no longer random. They are chapters in a long, unfinished manuscript of control and adaptation. Reading it doesn't offer comfort, but it offers clarity. And clarity, in a world built on curated delusion, is the most dangerous truth of all. Because once you begin to see the hidden architecture of power you trace its outlines through history. Money and myth can never unsee it. The question then is no longer what is true, but who decides what truth is allowed to be. Reality, it turns out, isn't discovered. It's negotiated. And those negotiations, those quiet exchanges between power and perception are the real history of our world.